Welcome to TechNova Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost lunar lander. This thing is actually on its way to the moon and sending back some seriously cool images as we speak.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it's not just the images, like that picture of a lunar eclipse it took.
Yeah.
It's part of this much bigger program, the Artemis program, that's trying to get humans back on the moon for the first time in over 50 years.
Yeah, that's right. Over 50 years. We actually have a great article here from the Economic Times that details the whole mission. And I'm excited to dig in and see what this Blue Ghost lander is all about. So first things first, it's part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative. What exactly is that? Is that like a space Uber for science experiments?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty good comparison. NASA's basically using this program to work with commercial companies to send stuff to the moon. Payloads and things.
Yeah.
And Blue Ghost is one of those. And it's carrying 10 different instruments from NASA to do research on the moon.
Wow, 10 instruments. What kind of research is it doing up there?
So it's mainly designed to study the moon's surface conditions, which is really important if we want to do more lunar exploration in the future. If we're thinking long-term, like setting up a moon base or something, we need to know as much as we can about what it's like up there.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So let's walk through the journey so far. Blue Ghost launched on January 15th on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, and it's currently orbiting Earth. But it's already sent back some pretty amazing photos, especially that lunar eclipse one. Just incredible. It must be pretty wild to see Earth's shadow on the moon from a spacecraft.
Oh, absolutely. It really gives you a unique perspective. And what makes it even more remarkable is that it was able to capture that eclipse while it was orbiting Earth, with Earth passing right between the lander and the sun to cast that shadow.
Wow, yeah, like having a front row seat to a cosmic phenomenon.
Yeah.
So what's next for Blue Ghost? When does it actually head to the moon?
Well, it's scheduled to leave Earth orbit pretty soon, and after that it'll spend about 4 days traveling to the moon. Once it gets there, it'll spend about 16 days orbiting the moon, doing more research, before finally landing near Mons Lettre. It's an ancient volcanic formation in the Mare Crisium Basin.
Okay, I'm going to have to practice saying that one, Mons Lettre. But why did they choose that particular spot for Blue Ghost to touch down?
Well, Mons Lettre, being an ancient volcanic formation, offers some really valuable insights into how the moon formed and changed over time. By studying this area, scientists can learn a lot about the moon's volcanic past and even what the inside of the moon might look like. It's like a window into the deep past of the moon.
Like a lunar time capsule. That's pretty cool. So what exactly will Blue Ghost be doing once it actually lands? I know we touched on the 10 instruments, but are there any experiments we should be particularly excited about?
Well, one that really stands out is its ability to capture high-definition 4K images of what's called the lunar horizon glow. And this is something that has only ever been seen by the Apollo 15 and 17 astronauts. So being able to capture this glow in such detail has the potential to teach us a lot about what the lunar atmosphere is made of.
Hold on, the moon has an atmosphere. I thought it was just a vacuum.
You're right, it is incredibly thin, almost nothing compared to Earth's atmosphere. But it is there. And it's thought to be made up mostly of things like helium, neon, and argon, probably released from the lunar surface because of things like radioactive decay and the solar wind.
So by studying this lunar horizon glow, we can actually learn more about what this very thin lunar atmosphere is made of. That's really interesting. What else is Blue Ghost going to be looking at?
Well, another key thing it'll be doing is documenting a total lunar eclipse, but this time from the moon's surface, which would be something we've never seen before. Imagine the view, witnessing the Earth's shadow cast upon the moon from the surface.
Wow, that would be amazing. But what would be the scientific significance of that? I mean, besides it just looking awesome.
Well, it would give scientists a totally new way to look at this celestial event, potentially revealing more about how light and shadow interact in the lunar environment. It's a pretty unique chance to study eclipses in a way that's never been done before.
This is all pretty incredible. So Blue Ghost is set to land on March 2nd. What happens after that? How long will it be working on the moon's surface?
So the plan is for it to operate for one full lunar day, which is about 14 Earth days. But then the lunar night poses a bit of a challenge. The extreme cold and lack of sunlight, it'll likely shut down during that time.
So it's a race against time to gather as much data as possible before that lunar night hits. But is that it then? Is that the end of the mission after that lunar night?
Well, it's likely that Blue Ghost won't be able to function after the lunar night. But even in that short time, the information it gathers will be incredibly valuable to the scientific community, and it'll be analyzed and studied for years to come.
It's like a legacy of knowledge left on the moon. What a thought.
It's a pretty inspiring idea, isn't it? It's like a stepping stone for future missions to the moon, building our understanding of the moon and helping to inform future exploration efforts.
So Blue Ghost is boldly going where very few spacecraft have gone before. It's taking incredible pictures, it's packed with all these scientific instruments, and it's part of this huge program that's aiming to put humans back on the moon. I'm honestly hooked.
Yeah, me too.
No,
And you know what? We've only just scratched the surface here. We haven't even really talked about what Blue Ghost might find and what that could mean.
that's right. And we will definitely be diving deeper into that. But before we move on, I have a question for our listeners. If you had the chance to send a message to the moon aboard Blue Ghost, what would it be?
Ooh, what a great question. That really makes you think about what this mission means for us. What our connection to the moon is really all about.
It's not just about the science and technology, is it? It's about human curiosity and our desire to explore, this never-ending fascination with the cosmos.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk more about the research that Blue Ghost is doing and what it could mean for the future of lunar exploration in our next segment. But in the meantime, let us know what message you would send to the moon. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Blue Ghost mission.
It is pretty mind-blowing to think that right now, as we're talking, this little lander is, out there hurtling towards the moon.
It really shows how far we've come with space exploration, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Last time we talked about the journey Blue Ghost has made so far, that incredible photo of the lunar eclipse it captured and its upcoming landing near Mons Trail.
Oh yeah, Mons Trail. It's a fascinating area, isn't it? Not only is it an ancient volcanic formation, but it's also located in the Maricranian Basin, one of the most prominent lunar maria.
Now, we hear about Luna Maria a lot, but what exactly are they? They sound kind of mysterious.
Well, the term maria might sound mysterious, but it just means seas in Latin. Early astronomers, when they looked at the moon through their telescopes, they thought these dark, smooth areas they saw were actually like bodies of water.
So they were wrong. What are these Lunar Maria really made of?
Well, now we know that they're actually huge plains of solidified lava. Imagine, like massive volcanic eruptions billions of years ago, spewing molten rock all over the lunar surface. And as this lava cooled and hardened, it formed those dark, smooth plains we see today.
So Blue Ghost is landing in the middle of like a giant ancient lava flow. That's wild.
It is, and that's what makes this landing spot so scientifically valuable. By studying the composition of the rocks and soil in this area, scientists can learn a lot about the history of volcanoes on the moon, and they can even get a better understanding of what's inside the moon.
Like a giant open-air geology lab.
Exactly. And Blue Ghost has all the right tools to unlock the secrets hidden within these ancient lava flows.
Speaking of tools, let's talk more about the research Blue Ghost is actually conducting. You mentioned some really exciting experiments in the last segment. Can we dive into those a bit more?
Sure. Remember those high-definition 4K images of the lunar horizon glow we were talking about?
Right. The ones only the Apollo 15 and 17 astronauts have ever seen.
Exactly. Blue Ghost is going to capture those glows with incredible detail, and that could potentially give us a whole bunch of new information about what the lunar atmosphere is made of.
I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around the fact that the moon even has an atmosphere. I know you said it's super thin, but where did it even come from?
That's a great question. Scientists think that the lunar atmosphere, thin as it is, formed from gases that were released from the moon's surface. Things like radioactive decay and particles from the solar wind constantly bombarding the surface. Over a very long time, these processes created that thin veil of gases around the moon.
So Blue Ghost could help us figure out not just what's in the lunar atmosphere, but also how it got there in the first place.
That's the hope. By studying that lunar horizon glow, we can learn more about how the lunar atmosphere formed and how the moon interacts with the solar wind.
Now, besides looking at the lunar horizon glow, you also mentioned that Blue Ghost is going to try to document a total lunar eclipse.
It is, but here's the thing. It's going to try and document it from the surface of the moon. Imagine seeing Earth's shadow cast on the moon's landscape. It's a perspective we've never had before.
That would be an amazing sight. I can only imagine all the data scientists could collect from that. But it's not just about the cool factor, right?
Oh, definitely not. Watching a lunar eclipse from the moon's surface would give us some really unique scientific opportunities. Scientists could study how Earth's shadow affects the environment on the moon, things like the temperature and the behavior of that super thin lunar atmosphere.
It's amazing how much we can learn about the moon from just one event. I'm starting to see how valuable Blue Ghost's research could be.
And we've barely scratched the surface here. Don't forget, Blue Ghost has 10 different instruments. It can measure the temperature of the lunar surface, analyze the composition of the soil, and study how the solar wind interacts with the moon's magnetic field.
Wow. All of this is making me super excited about what the future of lunar exploration holds. What are some of the big long-term goals that missions like this one are paving the way for? What's the bigger picture here?
One of the most ambitious goals, and honestly the most exciting, is to establish a permanent human presence on the moon.
Wait, are we talking about actually building a base on the moon?
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
A lunar base would be like a science outpost, you know, a place to test new technologies and maybe even a launching pad for missions further into our solar system.
That sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but also kind of realistic given everything that's happening in space exploration these days. But what are some of the things we need to figure out before we can actually build a base on the moon?
Well, there are definitely challenges, and they're not small ones. The moon's environment is really harsh. There's no atmosphere to speak of, the temperatures are extreme, and there's constant radiation exposure. These are all things we have to think about when we're designing habitats and systems to support human life.
It seems like a pretty massive task. How do we even begin to deal with all of that?
It all starts with missions like Blue Ghost. The information it's collecting will help us understand the lunar environment better, which will help us develop the technologies and strategies to deal with those risks. For example, if we understand the composition of the lunar soil, we could use that to create building materials for lunar habitats.
So Blue Ghost isn't just doing research, it's also laying the groundwork for a future where humans could actually live and work on the moon.
That's exactly it. Every mission builds upon the knowledge gained from the missions that came before, pushing the boundaries of what's possible and bringing us closer to that dream of a lunar base.
It's truly amazing stuff. Okay, so we've talked about Blue Ghost's journey, the landing site, the science it's doing, and even touched upon some of the future possibilities. Is there anything else we should know about this mission?
There's one crucial element we haven't discussed yet, and that's the role of commercial partnerships in space exploration.
Ah, you're right. Blue Ghost is part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, which means they're working with private companies to make this all happen.
Exactly. This program shows how NASA is working together with the private sector to achieve some really big goals. It's beneficial for everyone involved.
So it's not just government agencies leading the way in space anymore.
That's right. We're seeing a whole new era of space exploration, one where commercial companies are playing a huge role in pushing the limits of what we can do in space. By partnering with companies like Firefly Aerospace, NASA gets access to innovative technologies and new ways of thinking, all while making these missions more affordable.
It sounds like this collaboration is really shaking things up in a good way.
It definitely is, and that's something to be excited about. This new way of approaching space exploration could really speed up scientific discoveries and the development of new technologies.
I'm starting to understand why there's so much excitement around this mission. It's not just about sending a lander to the moon, it's about finding a whole new way of doing things, a new era of teamwork and creativity in space exploration.
You got it. And who knows what incredible discoveries await us as Blue Ghost continues on its mission.
I can't wait to find out. I'm especially excited to see those images of the lunar horizon glow and the total lunar eclipse captured from the surface of the moon.
I think we all are. Those images will be more than just pretty pictures. They'll represent a big jump forward in our understanding of the moon and how it fits into our solar system.
Speaking of understanding, let's go back to that question we asked our listeners at the end of the last segment.
You mean the message to the moon?
Exactly. If you had the chance to send a message aboard Blue Ghost, what would you say? We've been getting some really interesting responses from our listeners, and I think it would be great to share a few of them.
I agree. It's fascinating to hear all the different thoughts and perspectives this mission has inspired.
One listener wrote, "My message would be thank you for being a constant source of wonder and inspiration throughout human history. May we always try to understand and protect you."
Ah, that's beautiful. It really captures that deep connection we have with the moon as humans.
Another listener said, "I would send a message of hope. May humanity learn from past mistakes and use its knowledge to build a better future for everyone, both on Earth and beyond."
A powerful message and definitely a relevant one as we explore more of space.
And lastly, one listener kept it simple and said, "Thank you, Blue Ghost, for reminding us that anything is possible when we dare to dream big and work together."
What a fitting tribute to the mission and everyone involved in it.
It's amazing how this mission has inspired so much thoughtfulness and creativity in our listeners.
It shows us that space exploration is about so much more than just science and technology. It's about igniting wonder and pushing the limits of human ingenuity. It reminds us that we're all in this together as we explore the universe.
Well said. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have one last question for you. Given everything we've talked about so far, what do you think is the most important part of the Blue Ghost mission? What makes this mission stand out from all the others?
Wow, that's a tough one. There's just so much to be excited about with this mission. But if I had to pick one thing, I'd say it's how Blue Ghost really embodies the future of space exploration.
Can you expand on that a little? What exactly do you mean by the future of space exploration?
Well, think about it. Blue Ghost combines cutting-edge technology, ambitious scientific goals, partnerships with private companies, and a renewed focus on exploring the moon. It's not just about what Blue Ghost will find, it's about how it will find it. It's like a model for how we can push the boundaries of what we can achieve in space in the years to come.
So it's not just about the destination, it's also about the journey.
Exactly. And it's a journey we're all taking together. Whether we're scientists, engineers, or just everyday people looking up at the night sky, we're all part of this incredible adventure.
That's a beautiful thought. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive into the Blue Ghost mission.
But our journey isn't over yet. There's still so much more to explore, so much more to discover.
You're right. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll be talking about the potential for finding resources on the moon and the challenges of establishing a permanent human presence there. We'll discuss whether lunar mining is actually feasible, the technology we'll need to overcome those challenges, and all the ethical considerations we'll need to address as we continue exploring the moon.
It's a future full of possibilities, and we can't wait to share it all with you.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Blue Ghost mission.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, hasn't it? We've talked about the mission so far, all the cool science Blue Ghost is doing, and even what the future of exploring the moon could look like.
We even heard from our listeners and their messages to the moon. It's amazing how this mission has really captured people's imaginations.
It just goes to show you the power of space exploration, right? It inspires us and makes us think bigger.
Speaking of thinking bigger, in this last part, we're going to talk about something that could really change everything. Resources on the moon. We'll be discussing things like mining on the moon, the challenges of building a sustainable human presence there, and all the amazing possibilities that come with it.
It's definitely a topic that gets people talking, and it brings up some important questions about how we explore space and how we interact with other celestial bodies. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Let's start with the basics. What kind of resources are we even talking about here? What's on the moon that's so valuable we'd want to mine it?
Well, you might be surprised to learn that the moon actually has a lot of resources that could be incredibly useful for future lunar settlements and maybe even for use back here on Earth.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are some examples? What exactly would we be mining on the moon?
One of the most sought-after resources is something called helium-3. It's this rare isotope of helium that's almost non-existent on Earth, but relatively abundant on the moon.
Helium-3. Okay, so why is it so valuable? What can we actually use it for?
Helium-3 is seen as a potential fuel for fusion reactors in the future. And unlike nuclear fission, which is what powers our nuclear power plants right now, fusion doesn't create that long-lived radioactive waste. Plus, it's way more energy efficient.
Wait, so are we talking about powering our cities with clean energy from the moon?
It's definitely a possibility, although we're not quite there yet. Fusion technology is still in its early stages of development, but the potential is definitely there. And with all that helium-3 on the moon, it's a pretty attractive target for future resource extraction.
That's incredible. Are there any other resources besides helium-3 that we might want to mine on the moon?
Oh, for sure. The moon also has a lot of what are called rare earth elements, which are super important in making all our modern electronics. And then there are the more familiar metals like titanium, aluminum, and iron, which could be used for building and manufacturing.
So we could potentially not only power our cities with lunar resources, but also build habitats and even make things right there on the moon.
You got it. That's the whole idea behind creating a self-sustaining presence on the moon. We wouldn't have to rely on Earth as much for resources, and it would open up so many possibilities for long-term lunar settlements.
This all sounds amazing, but I have a feeling it's not quite as easy as just sending up some mining equipment and calling it a day, right?
You're right. It's definitely not that simple. Lunar mining is still a very new concept, and there are so many technical, logistical, and ethical challenges we have to consider.
Okay, so let's break down those challenges. What are some of the biggest hurdles we need to overcome?
Well, for starters, we have to remember that harsh lunar environment we keep talking about. Extreme temperatures, no atmosphere to speak of, and constant radiation exposure. All of that makes operating machinery incredibly difficult.
It's totally different from setting up a mining operation here on Earth.
Absolutely. We'd have to develop special equipment that could survive in those conditions, and ideally, it would have to be able to work on its own, or at least with very little human input.
What about the costs? I imagine getting all that equipment and people to the moon would be insanely expensive.
Yeah, that's another big challenge. Launching payloads into space is still very costly, though companies like SpaceX are working on bringing those costs down.
So it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? Weighing the potential benefits of these lunar resources against the cost of getting them and bringing them back to Earth.
Exactly. And then on top of that, we have to consider all the ethical implications.
Ah, right. What are the environmental impacts of lunar mining? And are we going to see conflicts over who gets access to these resources?
Those are really important questions. We have to develop responsible and sustainable mining practices that minimize the impact on the lunar environment. And we'll need clear international agreements and regulations to make sure everyone has fair access to these resources and to prevent conflicts from arising.
So, as lunar mining becomes more of a reality, it sounds like we'll need a whole new set of rules for space.
Absolutely. The legal framework we have for space right now, which is mostly based on the Outer Space Treaty from 1967, was written way before anyone was even thinking about mining the moon. So we really need to start thinking now about how to update those agreements so they address the complicated issues of resource extraction and use in space.
It's fascinating to think about how our laws and regulations will have to evolve as we explore more of the cosmos. So, while lunar mining might still be a long way off, it's clear that it could completely change the game. What about building a sustainable human presence on the moon? What kinds of challenges are we facing with that?
Well, the challenges are actually pretty similar to those we face with lunar mining, just on a much larger scale. To create a permanent human presence on the moon, we need to develop habitats that can protect people from that harsh environment, provide all the essentials for life like air, water, and food, and also allow people to do research and maybe even start businesses and industries.
It sounds like we're talking about creating a mini Earth on the moon.
That's a good way to put it. We'd have to create systems that can recycle air, water, and waste. And we'd have to figure out how to generate power and grow food in a completely different environment.
Those are some serious challenges, but they're also super exciting to think about. Imagine humans living and working on the moon, doing research, exploring the lunar surface, and maybe even creating new technologies and industries.
It's an idea that humans have dreamed about for centuries, and missions like Blue Ghost are helping to make it more of a reality. Every step forward, every piece of information we gather brings us closer to that goal.
It's truly amazing. And to think all of this is happening right now, as we're talking, Blue Ghost is out there on its way to the moon, collecting data that will help us achieve these incredible goals.
It just goes to show that we live in a remarkable time. We're on the verge of a new era in space exploration, one that holds so much potential for humanity.
It reminds us that the desire to discover and explore is still strong, and it pushes us to reach for the stars and beyond.
And who knows where this journey will lead us next.
That's the beauty of it all, isn't it? The unknown is out there, and we're ready to explore it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Blue Ghost mission, everyone. It's been a truly inspiring journey, and we can't wait to see what the future holds for lunar exploration.
Until next time, keep looking up and keep exploring.